Here's a Life magazine from September 1988. I remember that year pretty well because I was 14. And the topics are One Baby's Price, Brazen Rocker George Michael, and Diaries from the Drought. And the cover story is Paul Newman's Dreams, a caring camp for ailing kids. So in the 80s, we all kind of started seeing that Paul Newman was getting politically and socially active because one day we went to the grocery store, we got a free bag of Newman's own popcorn, and it came in a brown paper bag, and we thought it was kind of funny because that was the first time we'd heard of Paul Newman doing anything outside of acting. And then they had like a picture of him on the package, and it talked about how he wanted to make this popcorn and donate all the proceeds to charity. So that was the beginning of the Paul Newman salad dressing and popcorn and stuff. Still, you can find it, I think. Here's Joe Camel, a very controversial cartoon character from the 80s because there was a moral panic saying that more kids knew who Joe Camel was than Mickey Mouse. That's probably not the case anymore. Here's an ad for the Peugeot. When I think of Peugeots, I always think of Columbo because that was the make of car he drove. Didn't look like that one. I think he drove a 1950s Peugeot. This is the Peugeot 405, voted European Car of the Year by the widest margin in history. Lucille Ball was a huge thing in the 80s that she had made a big comeback. The Honeymooners and I Love Lucy both had made a large comeback around this time in reruns, and people were buying. She was pushing Marilyn Monroe fame for a while there because there was I Love Lucy everywhere, and now here's an offer from CBS Video Library to get I Love Lucy on VHS. And how much is it? The collector's edition, get your first video cassette, 3 episodes for just $4.95, and then subsequent cassettes, holy cow, were $29.95 each. But that's actually not that bad because at this time in 1988, before VHS movies were priced to own, it wasn't unusual to pay $80 to $100 for a VHS movie. We went to the mall in the mid to early 80s one time, and they had a display of The Godfather on VHS, and it was in a display window on top of a velvet cushion with silk all around it, like it was a luxury item. And now, I mean, DVD and Blu-ray, it's cheaper to go to Redbox and buy a movie than it is to rent it on Vudu or Amazon Prime. Like the other day, we wanted to watch Dr. Sleep, so we just went to Redbox and bought it for $3.99. Why rent it, especially the way the internet is right now with the pandemic? You can't even keep a connection for more than 5 minutes. This is with his dog Boudreaux bounding alongside. Hoosier farmer David Harrer drives past his 500 acres of corn, less than half their normal height. The shriveled stalks attest to the country's worst drought in 50 years. So, in 1988, there was a big drought in Iowa. Let's see. Ad for Diamonds by De Beers. And let's see what's going on here. That's just the publisher page. Come feel the warmth of Mexico. Yeah, Acapulco. I don't know if you watched The Love Boat. The Pacific Princess was always, their destination was Acapulco. So I've been to Mexico a lot. My favorite places is Cozumel. It's very beautiful beaches there. John Cleese, looking pretty young. He was in a movie called A Fish Called Wanda. At that time, that was really popular and considered very edgy. It had Kevin Kline and Jamie Lee Curtis. It was considered very, very edgy when it came out. Controversial. Here's an ad for Carlton cigarettes. Let's see. They put bubbles and tours in the Chateau County of France was celebrating the 5th year of a successful river cleanup. When the charred remains of toxic chemicals spilled into the Brenne and Cisse rivers, the aftermath of a nighttime explosion at a riverside factory, the accident, fought with a fire retardant foam, left a lot of froth and carpet of dead fish. The area's residents, who depend on the Loire, I guess it may be pronounced Lou River, downstream for their drinking water, had to wait for the pollutants to sink in or dissipate. Local grocery stores, meanwhile, did a record business in Perrier, bottled French water, which was also a fad in the 80s. Perrier bottled water was like what all of the rich people drink in the 80s, because bottled water, here's another thing about the 80s. There wasn't bottled water like we have now. That is one of the most amazing things that's ever happened in my lifetime, is watching the advent and circulation of water bottles. Let me just explain this. In the 80s, and someone back me up here, you could go to the store and you could buy Coke, you could buy Pepsi, you could buy 7-Up, and you could buy Perrier if you wanted to pay money for a glass bottle of water. But then somehow they managed to convince everyone in the country that the tap water in America, which is the safest tap water in the world, was dangerous. They had commercials, and I remember the commercials with little children drinking the water, and it was like a horror movie, and people started buying bottled water. Then they started saying that water was going to be scarce and all this stuff, and it was polluted, and people were buying distilled water. And here, let me just explain this. Water will never go away. You can make water. You can set up stills in your backyard and distill your own water. You can collect rainwater. There will always be water. I mean, I know I buy a bottle of water every now and then too, because it's convenient, especially if you're at the beach or something like that. But this craze of bottled water started after the 80s and the 90s, and it has created mountain landfills of water bottles. And it's tap water. It's just tap water poured into these bottles. You're drinking the same thing that comes out of the faucet, and you're paying for it, and they are laughing their way to the bank. It's just crazy, the things that happen in my lifetime. But we all buy a bottled water now because it's just here to stay. I don't get it. I just don't get it. The Shroud of Turin. I think this is when they carbon dated it. There's still a lot of controversy over how accurate that carbon dating was, because there was pieces of fabric that were sewn into it around 500 years ago to when it was burned. So honestly, you're either going to believe or you're not going to believe on that one. Many of the technology, and I'm not particularly, I'm not going to talk about my personal beliefs, but the thing is, though, is always take everything you hear these days and consider that 100 years ago they were treating people, medicine and science and everything was, when we think about what was done then, we laugh. But what was done in the 80s now is not even considered foolproof. Science comes and goes and ebbs and flows, and now they're saying the law of DNA tests, it may be convicting innocent people. There's just a lot of uncertainty. I just think that in a few hundred years, we may look back at this time period we're living in now and think about how backwards it is. Doll collecting was a big deal in the 80s. Lots of people collected dolls. I don't know why, but I had relatives, you go in their house and they'd have dolls. Who am I to talk with all my action figures? I have no room to talk. Here's an ad for Salem. I think these are the refreshiest. These are menthol cigarettes, which are just, cigarettes are already disgusting, but menthol. I mean, oh my gosh, I just think of instant headache. Now I'm not a smoker, thank goodness, but I just the idea of that just grosses me out. I don't judge smokers because I was in the military and I've definitely smoked more than one cigarette, and I know how hard they are to quit. And I don't have any hatred just for smokers, but I do hate the cigarettes. Um, Rum invades the province of vodka. Rum's of Puerto Rico. Here's George Michael, recently passed away. He was very famous for a song called I Want Your Sex that came out. It was also featured in the movie Beverly Hills Cop Part 2. Uh, when I say the song was controversial in the 80s, I can't state that enough. This song was banned. People were outraged. The video was, there was parental advisories when it was on MTV at first. It was on the news. And it would be rated like Super G today. It would be rated Triple G. But it was just a different time. This is the Ford Taurus. It seemed like I saw this car for about 20 years, never changing. And I think every 1 year, I think every single person in America bought one of these. I'm not sure. I just saw these everywhere. I remember that particular thing in the front. And this car was kind of ageless and timeless for a while. This is what cars all looked like, it seemed like, for a long time. George Michael. He writhed on stage in Rotterdam. Yamaha percussion instruments. Here we get to Paul Newman with all of his charity work. I've enjoyed Paul Newman movies. My favorite Paul Newman movie is obviously Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, followed by The Sting. My two favorite Paul Newman movies. I like the show he did called Empire Falls on HBO. And I like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Here's the Hyundai Cars That Make Sense. $5,395 for this car. $53.95, but you don't have to tell anybody. I mean, why did they say that? Because this was the decade of the Wall Street yuppie. So going to Walmart was embarrassing. Going to a thrift store was just suicide inducing. And talking about buying something cheap. I mean, people would buy. Here's a good example. It was not uncommon in the 80s for people to buy a cheap outfit or clothes for somebody and then stick it in a bag from a more expensive store, because status and brand names were so insanely relevant back then. Some of the commercials I remember on TV showed like this yuppie lifestyle that was just through the roof crazy. Like there was a certain umbrella that had dice on the handle, and it was like sickeningly expensive. And then I remember the commercials, and it showed this yuppie couple on top of a roof in New York, and they're playing with giant dice, and they're rolling it, and then the dice roll off the roof, and then they're like, oh no, we don't have any dice for our game. And then she pulls out her umbrella that has the dice, and I was just thinking, who lives like this? But that was the time of excess. The 80s was a time of excess, and we all aspired. Not me, I was a kid, but a lot of people aspired to be yuppies. The shows were 30-something was a popular show. The movie was Wall Street. The clothes and cars and all of that stuff was king in the 80s. It was the 90s. We got this time period of looking grungy and dressing down and all of that. That was a direct response to the 80s. That was a reaction. That's why all of that started. It was about the drought. What you see isn't what you get. Merit cigarettes. Most people who buy economy cars are missing a few screws. And this is an ad from Nissan. Pick the wrong economy car and you could hear about it down the road in the form of squeaks, rattles, and other annoying reminders. Buy a Nissan Sentra and you're getting a car that's put together to stay forever, to stay together. For example, we don't skimp on the little things that keep dashboards from squeaking, weather stripping from flapping, and door panels from bulging. So before you buy just any economy car, check out a Nissan Sentra. You'd be crazy not to. And that car, saw a lot of those Nissan Sentras. Bernstein at 70. The granddaddy of American music, Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein, right? I'm guessing. Yeah, Leonard Bernstein, the guy who wrote West Side Story. I was like, not. Yeah, must be Leonard Bernstein. Well, he'd be over 100 now. No drips, no drabs. Delta, we're first because we last. Oh, not that plane, but the faucets. There's Bernstein. Is it really? My goodness. I mean, what? I just want to make sure I'm not saying the wrong person here. Look. Yeah, Leonard Bernstein. I wish they would say his first name occasionally. There's a lot of Bernsteins out there. And at this time, I think Katharine Hepburn was still alive. I think Jimmy Stewart might have been still alive. I remember when the guy who wrote Irving Berlin, I remember when he turned 100. Duke, the Democratic nominee, takes off for the main event. I think they're talking about Michael Dukakis. Yeah, Michael Dukakis. What killed that campaign was, well, he was running against Bush, who was Reagan just came off a popular presidency, and Bush was his vice president. So Dukakis had a big uphill battle, but he posed in a tank, and he looked really. They made fun of him for that a lot, and that's really what destroyed his campaign. And I think there was another thing he did having to do with freeing a criminal. I was really young when all this happened. I watched it mostly on Saturday Night Live. I think the election. And I remember his eyebrows. Yeah, Bush was super popular when he got elected, and then when the first Gulf War happened, his like his son, he had super duper high popularity for a while. Here's pictures from other campaigns: Richard Nixon, John Kennedy. The paper has changed. A rare picture of John F. Kennedy shirtless. Bush was very popular when he was president. What killed his re-election chances, what made him lose to Clinton, were a few things, but one of them was the "read my lips, no new taxes" thing that he ended up having to contradict later, and he was accused of being dishonest. But then, after Clinton, his son became president. There's a Toyota 4Runner. SUVs really hadn't. They were just starting to emerge at this time. When we watched The Goonies, that was the first time many of us had ever seen the quote-unquote SUV for the first time. We just had cars, and then we had some Broncos and Jeeps, but we didn't have SUVs really until the mid-'80s. Jesse Jackson. He was running for president this time, too. I remember one of the things Jesse Jackson did was he guest starred on Saturday Night Live to read Dr. Seuss books. That was one of the things he did on his campaign. Oh rats, it's Rachel. An outlandish performer meets the world's problems head on. This is Rachel Rosenthal. Rachel Rosenthal, West Coast leading practitioner, grapples with big issues: sex, war, money, animal rights. 7 years ago, in the midst of a piece about the transience of the body, she suddenly whipped out a razor and shaved her head. People became physically ill, she said proudly. It felt so good. I'm surprised women don't do it. It was a different time. Following the footsteps of Marco Polo. Oh, that's amazing. I'd love to see that. One baby's price. Adoption fees can add up to $10,000, but what was the cost to this mother who gave up her infant daughter? $10,000 was a lot of money in 1988. Keep in mind that the average lower middle class household functioned off of less than $30,000 a year. The average middle class household was about $35,000 a year for the entire family. That was the income. That was a $35,000 a year income was considered very solid in 1988. The classic cars of the 50s. Oh, the 50s was another rage. Of course, every 30 years ago, no matter what time it is always like popular because it's that time. Like right now, the 80s are popular. I remember the 80s very well. When I was a kid, the 50s were popular, and I wanted so bad to be Marty McFly and go back to the 50s. And I'm sure people nowadays probably aren't nearly as interested in the 50s as I was. And to me, it's amusing when people are interested in the 80s because to me it doesn't seem so long ago, and I can remember it. Like I can still smell things and taste things and synthesizers. We had one. Says America's Cup sailor Dennis Conner, competition is life's blood and I'm a vampire. Obsessed. That's a very 80s way of putting it. Like greed is good. But yeah, Hermit Kingdom. This is about North Korea. I'm saying the same things then that we do today, just a different leader. I don't think it was quite as Hermit Kingdom then, but a lot's happened since then. They built a lot more buildings. But the excellence of children and music and that kind of stuff was still a thing. That sort of communist art you see in the former Soviet Union countries and kneeling at statues. Windsor Canadian. The Divine Curse. In 1885, George Gao de la Tourette described the astonishing ailment that now bears his name, a syndrome characterized by an excess of nervous energy and extravagance of strange motions and notions, tics, jerks, mannerisms, grimaces, noises, curses, and compulsions of all sorts. The disease is rare, but in Lecrate, Alberta, a Mennonite farming village, there is an extended family of Touretters. In the community's eyes, they are touched by the hand of God. It took a long time for Tourette syndrome to be taken seriously in this country. It was used as a punchline in many movies in the 80s. When it was first talked about, people thought it was hysterical, the idea. And even through the 90s, it was made fun of a lot as just basically someone who swore all the time. I've known one person who had Tourette's, and it's not really just swearing. It's someone. It is more like the ticks and the noises and stuff like that. So, but it is starting to be treated like, what it is, something that people can't help and they shouldn't be penalized for it. Fila was a very popular company in the 90s. It became even really popular. People wanted Fila everything. I remember in the 80s the popular brands were Bugle Boys. When I was in school, you wanted Bugle Boys, you wanted whatever they were wearing on Miami Vice, whatever that stuff was. Jams, which was shorts that were really colorful. Um, what else was big? Nike and Fila were always kind of big. There was in the 90s there was shoes called British Knights, BKs. They were real popular. But black shoes with silver tips were popular. In the 80s, people used to peg their pants legs. They would roll up the bottom and peg them, make them narrow, put like a crease in the pants leg, and then roll it up. Acid wash jeans were real popular. And Coca-Cola shirts, like these weird shirts that had Coca-Cola written on them. They were like button down, I think, if I recall. Jerseys were kind of popular. Rock and roll and CDs. Ooh, compact discs. Those were crazy expensive. 2 LP records for $14.99, 1 double-length cassette for $14.99, or 1 compact disc for $16.99. That was actually a pretty good price for a compact disc. Time Life Music. America Needs a Hero for Every Age. Army National Guard. The Flow of History. They're looking at stuff from ice core samples, like pollen and stuff. That Gibson girl, a silver-tongued ingenue, sings her way into the green from out of the blue. Who's this? This is Debbie Gibson. Yeah, she was there was Tiffany and Debbie Gibson. Those were the two popular female singers of the time. And then for girls, they listened to, well, girls pretty much listened to them too, but they also listened to New Kids on the Block. That was the real popular thing. And that is the whole magazine. So I hope you like the stories from the 80s. To me, if you're fascinated about it, I can remember it like it was yesterday. So many. Keep in mind, I was in 1989. I was 15, so I have a pretty good memory of it. I remember every year of it. I was in kindergarten when 1980 turned over, and then I remember the major events. I remember Mount St. Helens. I remember the Challenger. I remember Reagan getting shot. I remember, Grenada, Beirut, or, and the big movies, the fads. The fads were a big deal. It was a very fad decade. There was a lot of from safety pins with little beads on it that were social outrages, to Garbage Pail Kids, to little muscle wrestling figures, to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Masters of the Universe, G.I. Joe figures. There was a lot going on in the 80s. It was a cool time to be a kid. It really was. It was a decade of a lot of excess, a lot of new wave music, and just very interesting time to grow up in. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be making another one soon. Bye.